Pixar Theory. The Pixar Theory is this idea that all Pixar movies take place in the same universe, put simply. So the movies that we're going to talk about, because there have been more since this theory was originally introduced, are the following 14. Starting in 1995 with Toy Story, which was the first Pixar movie, and ending in 2013 with Monsters, Inc., Monsters University, excuse me. But there are more since, like Inside Out and The Good Dinosaur, but those are for the Pixar Theory 2 and 3, which you can read about online. The idea of the theory is that all those movies actually take place in the same universe and roughly in this chronological timeline. My talk doesn't go through them in exactly this order, chronological timeline, but we will address all of the movies. And it all starts with Brave, and a lot of fun with Keynote. Brave is the first and last movie in this timeline. It's actually the only Pixar movie that explains why animals in the universe behave like humans sometimes, and it all starts with this character, Merida. Merida discovers the will of the wisps, also known as magic. We find out that this magic comes from an odd witch who's seemingly connected to the will of the wisps, and she actually uses this magic in this movie to turn her mother into a bear, which is important later. And this magic is why animals and inanimate objects like brooms and knives and tools all behave like humans. This is the witch making things behave funny. And so now in the theory, there are kind of two progressions that take place. There is the animal progression and the artificial intelligence progression. Follow with me, I swear it gets better. We're going to start with the animal progression because those movies take place first. And these movies set out what's going to be pretty much an all-out war between the animals and humans, starting out with Ratatouille, Finding Nemo, and Up. I left out A Bug's Life, which is also an animal movie, but we'll get back to that one later. So starting with Ratatouille, in Ratatouille we see animals behaving like humans, and they're starting to experiment with their own personification in small controlled experiments, specifically Remy, who wants to learn how to cook. It's something that humans only explicitly do as far as we know, and he crafts a relationship with a small group of humans and finds pretty good success. Meanwhile, at the end of the movie, we find the villain, Chef Skinner, disappears. And this raises the question of what happens to him, what did he do with his knowledge that mice can cook, or rats can cook, and that they can behave like humans? The answer to that question, Chef Skinner? The answer to that question is answered in Up. One possibility is that Charles Muntz, who's the villain in Up, he learns of this rumor, and he uses that information to invent devices that allow his dogs to talk, and he uses those dogs as his army. But then Doug, the adorable one at the bottom, who turns, Doug sets all of his dogs free, and that leads to Muntz's demise. And so we don't end up knowing the full implications of his research, but what we do know is that the animosity between animals and humans is growing. Some pointed out, actually, that Muntz this is kind of a tangent theory, but that Muntz was working in South America before the events of Ratatouille, but we know that Ratatouille takes place before Up for several reasons. Specifically, in Toy Story 3, this is Andy. On Andy's wall, here's Woody, and if you zoom in, there's a postcard from Carl and Ellie using their address and last name, so it's confirmed. And this confirms that in 2010, which is the time of Toy Story 3, if you remember from the chronological timeline, that Ellie is still alive, or she only died recently enough to still send a postcard. So this supports the idea that Up takes place years later, and that Ratatouille does in fact take place before Up. Okay, so now that humans have discovered the potential of animals, and the animosity between them is growing, humans begin investing in new technologies, which leads to the Industrial Revolution, which we see in Up. In this movie, Carl, the adorable old man, is forced to give up his house to a corporation because they're expanding the city. This corporation plays a huge role in all Pixar movies. Corporation is B&L. This is a scene from WALL-E where the corporation is kind of most famously known from. It stands for By and Large, and it runs just about everything by the time you actually get to WALL-E. But in the history of the B&L commercial, also in WALL-E, we learn that they started taking over the world governments and eventually kind of all of humanity. But a few kind of Easter eggs in case no one's ever noticed this before. In Toy Story, the batteries in Buzz Lightyear are from B&L. The manufacturer in cars for some of the parts, B&L. And lastly, and this is depending on your ability to read, the grape soda can that Carl wears, it looks like might be a By and Large soda can. So like all one universe, one big company. Yeah. This now, back to the animal progression. So at this point, Finding Nemo, the lines are really starting to be crossed, and we can see that the humans are starting to pollute the world, and animals and humans really do not get along. One example of this is, and just like the animal evolution, is Dory. She stands apart from a lot of the other fish because she isn't as intelligent. And you could look at it as sad or adorable, but mostly it stands as her not being as advanced as the other creatures, which kind of shows how quickly the rest of the animals are advancing and progressing in terms of their ability to talk and have conversations in schools, and they have a freeway system. I mean, it's incredible. And that's kind of the farthest movie in terms of the animal side of things, which now takes us over to the AI track of the Pixar universe, which starts off with The Incredibles. At this point, we have supers who are maintaining order in the universe. And if you remember from The Incredibles, there's Buddy, also known as Fanboy, who later becomes Syndrome. And he's the main villain of this movie, who basically, in case you haven't seen it, commits genocide on all the supers, or at least tries to. And the question here is why? Why does he do this? One obvious argument is that they answer this in the movie, that he's pissed off at all the supers. But how does he do it? He does it by creating Omnidroid, this terrifying looking machine here, which is an AI killbot that learns of moves of every superhuman and adopts them and is able to use their moves against them. But this also then raises, at the end of the movie, Omnidroid turns on Syndrome, which raises the question, why would a machine want to just start randomly attacking itself and its creator? Why do machines have an inherent hatred of humans? We know that animals don't like humans because they're polluting the earth and experimenting on them, but why would machines have an issue? Say hello, Toy Story. In Toy Story, we see the humans are using and describing these inanimate objects that are clearly sentient. And my favorite, was reading and preparing for this, someone said they love it Uncle Tom style, which I didn't realize was a phrase. But over the course of the Toy Story sequels, specifically in Toy Story 2, we see the toys becoming fed up. But this also raises the question of the inanimate objects aren't machines, and so how do they have the intelligence? We saw the magic helps people move and inanimate objects do things, but human intelligence is a whole different beast. We come back to Syndrome. Syndrome is the answer to this. When he was making Omnidroid, he actually tells Mr. Incredible that his lasers are powered by 0-point energy. This is the electromagnetic energy that exists in a vacuum, and it's what we find it in wavelengths, and it's what the toys and other objects in the Pixar universe use for power. So at this point, we are here in the timeline. We've only made it through 3 movies. We've skipped around because of all the animals, but by these events, kind of thinking in the AI timeline specifically, it's been about 40 or 50 years by the time we get to Toy Story from The Incredibles. There's been plenty of time for BNL or just the universe in general, to develop the AI for the toys to basically talk and move by themselves. So now picking up, all the while, Pixar is starting to hint at the dissatisfaction among the toys with civilization. We see in Toy Story 1, Sid, the toys ride up against Sid, they hate him. In the second one, we see that Jessie resents her owner, Emily, for leaving her. Side theory, Emily is actually Andy's mom. Look it up. A lot of evidence. And in the third Toy Story, we see Lotso hug and Bear, who's terrifying and just hates humans. He just hates them the most. So at this point, they've really kind of reiterated the fact that toys are obviously not satisfied with the status quo, providing a reason for why machines and objects alike are ready to take over. Now we're here. So by the 2000s, the superhumans are all gone. Mankind is vulnerable. Animals who want to rise up against the planet are ready, and they have the ability to take over, but we don't actually see this happen. Why? One reason, it's a children's universe. One option. Another is that it actually does happen. It just doesn't happen in the way that we think it does in the obvious kind of takeover scenario. The reality is that the machines used BNL, a faceless corporation, to dominate the world, starting in the 1960s with Omnidroid. After that fails to defeat the supers. But as the Toy Story movies point out, sentient objects rely on humans for everything, for their fulfillment, for their energy, just to be happy. They seem to really need the humans. For example, in the end of Toy Story 3, it's kind of hinted that if they put themselves into storage, they just somewhere in the attic, they kind of die, and they all hope to end up in a museum one day where there might be people again, so they might come back alive. So the toys need us. So the machines then make the decision, well, we hate them, but we need them. So they decide to control them by using BNL that suits their every need, leading to another industrial revolution that eventually leads to pollution, which is how we get to Nemo. And when the animals rise up against the humans to stop them from polluting, who will save them? The machines, because the machines need them. We know the machines will win the war too, because after this war, there are almost no animals left on Earth. We're only left with cars. Yes. But we'll get back to the cars. Before, we have to answer the question of what happens to the humans, because the machines tipped everything out of balance and Earth becomes an unfit planet for humans. Where do the humans go? Axiom, which is the super cool spaceship that we see in Up. So the remaining humans are all put on this spaceship, or Noah's Ark if you want to stick with the biblical theme that some people suggest exists, which is why Wall-E's counterpart, Wall-E is basically robot Jesus and Eva is Eve. That was the last-ditch effort to save the human race, rather. And on Axiom, the humans have absolutely no purpose, aside from just having their needs met by the machines. So the machines at this point, there's no reason for them to keep them around except that they need them for their energy. So the machines have made humans dependent on them for everything because this is how they were treated as toys. Again, it's all coming full circle. Meanwhile, back on Earth, machines are left behind to populate the world and run things, which explains why there are so many human landmarks in the Cars movies and traditions that are still being prominent. Fun fact, actually, in Cars, the Pixar team met with NASCAR and Fox Sports and talked to specifically the producers of NASCAR events to see all the types of camera angles and how they would broadcast such an event, which is why it feels so realistic. Also because it was in the same universe as humans, so they just had this information, obviously. But there's Japan and Europe and all these places that still exist on our human Earth. So same universe, same world. So this raises the question of what happens to the cars. Cars 2. So we know that humans are the source of energy for all the cars, but at this point, they got rid of all the humans, which is why they're actually having an energy crisis in Cars 2. The oil is now the only way for society to trudge on, despite the dangers of oil, which are brought up by this guy and Alanol. The Alanol Corporation was using green energy as a catalyst to fuel the war in order to turn cars away from alternate energy sources. This clean fuel, however, as we saw, could have wiped out the entire car population. Fun fact, some have pointed out that all in all is a synonym for by and large, B&L. Come on. Making the connection between cars and Wall-E even more substantial, which now takes us to Wall-E. One question that's kind of asked in the Pixar Universe conspiracy theorist place on the internet is why Wall-E's the only one left. And one answer is that, because we know the movie takes place about 800 years after the humans have left, and he's governed by an AI pilot called Autopilot, or just called Autopilot. But one theory is that Wall-E's fascination with the human culture and his friendship with the cockroach is what keeps him alive, the energy coming from the humans. And that's why he was special and was able to liberate the humans. And after he liberates them, they can rebuild society back on Earth. Other kind of crazy facts. At the end of Wall-E, we see this is in the ending credits. Some people speculate that it's the same tree from A Bug's Life, which now takes us to A Bug's Life. The reason I didn't mention it earlier is because this actually takes place after Wall-E. The idea is that after the humans start coming back, the reason there are no humans in A Bug's Life is because there aren't a lot left. We know the cockroach and Wall-E, because of the cockroach and Wall-E, that some insects survive, and then they have their whole own world and community. There's something a little different about A Bug's Life. I don't know if anyone's ever noticed this, but when compared to other Pixar portrayals of animals, the bugs have many human activity directly similar to what we do. They have a circus, they have Bloody Marys, they have bars, they have ads, they have, a lot of things. So this all assumes that this movie is taken in a different time because you actually don't see any humans in this movie at all. The other factor that sets it apart is it's the only one besides Cars and Cars 2 that don't revolve or include any humans because they all took place after. Sorry, I'm going a little long. But Newt is a Pixar movie that actually never came to be. There was a lot of turnover with directors and they canceled it. But the point of this is that it was supposed to release in 2012 and was canceled and replaced with Brave. But this movie, the tagline for the movie was, what happens when the last remaining male and female blue-footed newts on the planet are forced together by science to save the species and can't stand each other? This should have helped answer the question of how we got from Wall-E to A Bug's Life. but it never came to be, so we're just left to speculate about that. Kind of sad. Okay, so what happens next? Humans, machines, and animals that grow in harmony to the point where a new super species is born, the monsters. The monster civilization is actually Earth, just super far down the future after WALL-E, after A Bug's Life. Someone actually pointed out that Monsters University, the college, is said to be founded in 1313, which suggests that they restarted time when they came back. So started the calendar over. So this means that Monsters, Inc. could be taking place up to 1,400 or more years after A Bug's Life, just to give you a sense of timeline. So there are a lot of guesses about where they came from, and just probably an evolution from bugs is the most popular theory. An issue that some people, again, in this weird corner of the internet have, is that what happens to the humans? One answer, which fits in very nicely with the theory, is that they forgot that they need humans. They're just where they were kept evolving, and then they forgot that they need humans, which leads them to an energy crisis, because you need humans for energy, which takes us to Monsters, Inc., where they discover that they can scare children, and that's how they get energy. But that's really mean and awful and not for a good children's movie. So the monsters are then going back in time to harvest energy from children. And though a lot of time has passed, they still have animosity towards humans. They just don't really know why. It's the whole plot of the movie. And that their anti-human instincts believe that just touching a human would corrupt their whole universe like it did in the past. So they scare humans to get their energy until they realize that laughter, green energy, is more efficient. And by the end, the humans, animals, they've all found a way to understand each other and live harmoniously. The end. Or is it? It's not. Do you remember Boo from Monsters, Inc.? Boo has a super fascination with doors. Everything she saw taking place in this future Earth, where Kitty, who she thinks is Sully, was able to talk. She became obsessed with finding out what happened to her friend Sully and why animals in her time aren't quite as smart as the ones she had seen in the future. So she remembers that doors are the key to how she found Sully in the first place, which leads to the craziest part of this theory, that she is the witch. From Brave, now we've come full circle. She figures out how to travel in time to find Sully and goes back to what she believes is the source, which is the will of the wisps. This is where everything started. As a witch, she cultivates this magic in an attempt to find Sully by creating doors. The theory is that Boo discovered a way to use the doors to travel through time on her own, possibly by developing magic on her own. She probably went back to the Dark Ages for the magic from the will of the wisps. Some evidence of this is in her workshop. Can't see it, but in her workshop there's a piece of wood with Sully drawn on it. Pretty irrefutable. Also, in every Pixar movie is the pizza truck, which doesn't make sense at all in Brave because they're in the Dark Ages and there are no trucks. But another crazy Pixar theory is that actually every Easter egg in Brave also exists in her wood shop, which raises the question of why wood. And wood is very important to this theory. Wood has magical powers, as we all know. So she discovered that wood is a source of all energy, which is supported by the fact that the door they use to eradicate monsters is made of steel, not magical, which is why they're not able to come back through it. Many have pointed out that the door, yep, that's what I just said. Also, other references to wood in Pixar, the wood from A Bug's Life is the source of Flick's ingenuity. He uses wood all the time to do interesting things. The tree in A Bug's Life bears resemblance to the one in Up that Carl and Ellie visit, which is where he discovers the idea to make his house go away with balloons. And all over the Pixar movies, people are using wood for good ideas. So anyway, obsessed with finding Sully, Boo traveled across the Pixar universe using her wooden doors. And she went back to the Dark Ages because that's where there would have been the most wood because people hadn't chopped it all down yet. And we know that her first encounter with Mordor ended up with him turning Mordor into a bear, the same bear that she then helps Merida turn her mother into. There's a fascination with bears because the bear is Kitty, and she wants to find Sully and remake him. So at the end, the Pixar universe is all about love and everyone wanting to be, she wants Sully back. That's really the end.